Waheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Waheguru Ji Ki Fateh. Welcome to this segment of Coach Gurbani's a-sabad-a-day, the recitation for the day. Maj Mahalla Chautha. How gun Govind har naam te aayi, mil sangat man naam vasai. Har prab agam agochar swami, mil satgur har ras ki chai jiyo. Tan tan har jan jin har prab jata, jaye pucha jan har ki bata. Pav malowa mal mal towa, mil har jan har ras pi jai jiyo. Satgur date naam dridaya, vadpagi gur darshan paya. Amrit ras amrit boli, gur pure amrit li jai jiyo. Har sat sangat sat purkh milaye, mil sat sangat har naam te aaye. Nanak har katha suni mukh boli, gurmat har naam parichay jiyo. Now anyone with even the slightest familiarity with Gurbani should not be surprised to find a repeated emphasis on the need for trustworthy guidance and faithful congregation in order to develop on the path of Sikhi. And this is precisely the emphasis that we find in this passage. So the fourth Nanak, Guru Ram Das, speaks of synergy between individual effort and congregational learning in the very opening stanza of this passage. And that is a model that is all too familiar. So first, there is personal practice, which requires the cultivation of virtues and attentiveness to the presence of the self. How gun Govind har naam te aayi. Gun, qualities, excellences of Govind. Govind, a term meaning protector of the earth. Govind is one among many attributes of the Har, the all-knowing, all-pervading self within. So the personal practice involves cultivation of virtues that Gurbani is very specific about, which is really reining in the passions, modest appetites, and the practice of contentment, among other things. So that's personal practice. This then is reinforced in Sangat, which is a congregational setting. It reinforces this individual practice. Mir Sangat mana naam vasaya. And all of this happens in the presence of the true enlightener, the Satgur. The Satgur is the catalytic process. The Satgur is the catalyst that makes this paradigm shift possible. And what is the paradigm shift? Where the imperceptible and fathomless herself, remember, it's an essence. It's not something that can be seen with physical eyes or felt, but has to be experienced. So Guruji is saying the imperceptible and fathomless herself is experienced through this practice. Har Prab, now the Har Prab, that is to say, wisdom of the Har is Agam, Agochar, Swami. He's imperceptible, he's fathomless, it's beyond the senses, but he is the master. Mil Satgur har ras ki jiyo. That is how this transition happens in our perception. We begin to experience the presence of the self. Now, the critical thing to note in this is that Gurbani does not treat spiritual learning or advancement as a solo endeavor. It is like a mountain climber who scales the summit of a mountain but is always tied to Sangat or to the base camp. So, likewise, individual practice is intimately tied to and indeed rooted in community. Recall Guru Nanak's dialogue with the Siddhs. We have the Siddh Gosht, where he critiques them for escaping social responsibility, for in fact becoming completely apolitical. It is not enough, he said to them, to create a garden of inner experiences, mystical experiences, riddhiyan, siddhiyan, out-of-body experiences, what have you, with an isolated group of intimates. You know, these people lived in small gatherings that were very intimate with each other, but they were divorced from the larger mainstream. So Guru Nanak Ji considered this retreat into privatism to be one of the biggest failures of society then, of Indian society. And that's what he's addressing here. Now in this passage, again, a model we are familiar with, we tend to seek out experts, coaches, mentors when we are trying to either develop a new skill or trying to get our hands around a new body of knowledge. We all know that. So in like manner, Guru Ram Das here in this passage is searching for those blessed and fortunate ones, as he calls them, who have experienced this unitive experience of the self, Tan Tan Har Jan Jin Har Prabh Jata, who have known this experience. It is them that he is seeking. And then he's not beyond begging them to share their knowledge, where he says, Pava Malova, Malmalatova, Mil Harjan, Harras Pijay Jiyo. Now, of course, Pava Malova may or may not be taken literally, but the fact is that there is a degree of begging and a degree of pleading involved. And that's what happens when you go to an expert. You ask for a sharing of knowledge. That's what's happening here, especially in the spiritual realm. So the enlightener, the Satguru, the principle, as has been said, is the constant in all of this. Satguru Date Naam Dridaya. It is always this principle, Satguru Data, who can alone articulate into speech the knowledge of the self. Amrit Ras, such Amrit Boli. Amrit Ras, the wisdom, the essence of the wisdom, such Amrit Boli, utterance, true utterance, Gur Pure, perfected enlightener. Amrit Liche Piyo, receive that wisdom from the utterance of the enlightener. That's the literal meaning of this. But the point being, that principle of knowledge which we today experience through Gurbani has to be present individually or in congregation. And in the end of the passage, Guru Ram Das confirms his own experience. Nanak har katha suni mukh boli, Gurmat har naam parchaya jiyo. Parchaya, to experience. There's an important takeaway here. We find that the actual test of spiritual growth, spirituality, is not to be found on mountain tops or retreats into deep forests. Now, we know that there have always been exceptional individuals who do that and have achieved the inner experience. But the great challenge is, how do ordinary individuals living in the shadows of everyday life, how do they get to share in this experience in the midst of making a living? How do they come together peacefully? That is the revolution of Guru Nanak. He indeed forced a sharp U-turn away from selfish private practices, self-indulgences almost, to communal and congregational engagement, from just being self-indulgent towards oneself toward compassionate action in the public sphere. That is what he did. And now this can only happen when you understand the principle of the self that dwells in everyone. Ek hai, anek hai, phir ek hai. That understanding comes through Gurmat. With those thoughts, until the next time, Vaheguru Ji Ka Khalsa, Vaheguru Ji Ki Fateh.